Personal perspective as a commissioner, I should say right at the outset that these are my personal comments. The submissions that have been made, the interventions that have been made in the last 2 days will all be summarised, and there will be an official record of the regional dialogue. This isn't it, it's just the things that have occurred to me as particularly important or particularly striking. The first thing I wanted to say is that obviously this is part of the process. This is the third of the regional dialogues that the Global Commission has held. The first one was held in Bangkok in Thailand in February, the second one in Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago last month. There'll be another one in Latin America next month, and there'll be a number of others before the next full meeting of the Commission in August. And the reason that we decided on a regional dialogue process is because we wanted to make sure that our work was evidence-based. And so in addition to these regional dialogues, we're also commissioning research on questions that we feel bound to refer to in our final report. But it is, as I said yesterday when I spoke to the civil society groups here, and also I think I repeated this morning, it is an essential part of this process that we hear from people like yourselves who are dealing with the issues that are relevant on a day-to-day basis and who know the problems intimately and also can suggest the solutions. Because, as I say, we are determined to produce a robust report that is based on what we can happily defend as evidence. And I also want to refer to the regional issue paper that was prepared by Leah Chauvel, because that's the first time in a regional dialogue that we've had a summary of the legal position in the countries of the region, and I found it a very useful document. I hope that it's something that will be repeated for future regional dialogues. I'd also like to acknowledge the host country, the Republic of Moldova, and the very encouraging comments that we heard from the Minister of Justice, Oleg Efron, this morning. I'd also acknowledge the comments from the UN Resident Coordinator, Karina Immonen, and the UNDP Deputy Administrator, Rebecca Greenspan, by video. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the UNDP staff who've supported this dialogue, including Dr. Mandeep Dhaliwal, and the presence here today of Denny Broom, the UNAIDS Regional Director, because UNAIDS is the co-sponsor of the Global Commission along with the United Nations Development Programme. And it's also pleasing that roughly 1/3 of the governments in the region have chosen to participate in the dialogue. It was very useful to have the information that you as government delegates have shared with us, so thank you for your attendance. Just a couple of words about the Global Commission. It's the brainchild of the administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, my friend and former parliamentary colleague Helen Clark, who was Prime Minister of New Zealand. She was first elected to public office in 1981. She retired from that office in 2009, and for about 12 of those 28 years she was either Minister of Health or Prime Minister. New Zealand didn't encounter an AIDS case until 1985, but at that time consensual male homosexual acts were illegal. No one had the right to protection from discrimination on the ground of sexual orientation or health status. All sex work was illegal. We had very rudimentary laws and practices relating to intravenous drug use. Marital rape wasn't an offence. State drug purchasing policy was unsophisticated. There wasn't great knowledge of reproductive health and sexually transmitted diseases. Basically, we were a conservative little country, and we'd done very little to change our colonial legal code that we inherited from the United Kingdom, which saw drug use, prostitution and sex work as social evils that the law should try somehow to stamp out. So by the time that Helen Clark left politics in 2009, much of this had changed. We had a needle syringe exchange and methadone program, comprehensive anti-discrimination laws, the right to civil unions for same-sex couples, homosexual acts and prostitution decriminalised, the rights of married women enhanced. The state is now a very effective purchaser of pharmaceuticals. In fact, I think we push the envelope on generics as much as we can get away with the international treaties that we're party to. And we've engaged in a lot of education, public education around safe sex practices, so that we can make sure that groups at risk of HIV are destigmatised and that people who aren't infected can keep themselves safe. So I think Helen Clark can take credit for a number of those developments because they signify the law moving from a punitive approach to an empowering one. Obviously we still have problems in my country, but it's no coincidence that with that set of legal rights, New Zealand has one of the lowest HIV prevalence rates in the world, and that treatments available to people with HIV are as good as pretty much anything on offer in the developed world. Now, I accept that no region's experiences are directly comparable to another's, but the New Zealand experience, which is now echoed in a number of other jurisdictions, shows that the law can be moved from an instrument of repression to one of empowerment, and that such a shift can be instrumental, in fact it's necessary, in making it easier for people at particular risk from HIV infection to access prevention and treatment services. As such, their health, their rights and their human dignity are protected, and the risk of a general HIV epidemic is averted. And it's that shift that the Global Commission on HIV and the law seeks to encourage and replicate widely, consistently with local conditions. So how does it bring us to deal with Eastern Europe and Central Asia? We've heard that this is the only part of the world where HIV infections are still on the rise, with Russia and the Ukraine accounting for 90% of new infections globally. We heard some encouraging signs. There was Moldova's progressive prison and other laws and policies, Kyrgyzstan's moves toward treating drug addiction as a medical rather than a legal issue, the Ukraine's legislation removing the requirement to disclose HIV status that was adverted to earlier. And in the papers there was a note about Russia's provision of social protection rights for the children of HIV positive people. And obviously, in respect of countries going through the accession process, or those that have gone through it, there is a reorientation of some important national laws which will bring them in the right sort of direction as far as HIV control is concerned. It's interesting that one of the recommendations that came out of the Caribbean Regional Dialogue was that given the common British colonial origin of many of the repressive laws still in force in that region, a new model code on legal questions relevant to HIV that countries in the region could adopt without having to begin drafting from scratch might be a good idea. And I wonder, in light of the common Soviet origin of the laws of this region, whether that might be a solution that could be adopted here as well, with the provisions of the model code being based on the evidence that we have of best practice and relevant international legal norms. Too often the overall tenor that we've heard when national legal systems are described is one that is punitive rather than empowering. This appears to be a common heritage of the old Soviet approach that prevailed across the region until the late 1980s and early 1990s, and which appears to continue to dominate thinking in Russia, the largest and most influential jurisdiction in the region. We heard that attitudes behind this approach also continue to be widespread, even in countries that have largely purged it from their statute books and limit the effective enforcement of progressive laws where they exist. Some of the specific issues that particularly struck me included the following. Injecting drug use accounts for the vast majority of regional HIV infections, but drug use remains criminalised in 6 countries. 5 countries don't permit substitution therapy. 8 countries provide for drug-using mothers to lose care of their children. Severe social stigma attaches to drug use, and drug users face discrimination and arbitrary barriers to accessing healthcare, justice, work and education. Registration requirements can have ongoing negative social effects. None of this is acceptable, nor does it represent an effective response to the epidemic. Given the rate of new infections, it seems clear that the punitive approach to the issue has failed. There's an obvious need to consider the merits of the decriminalisation of drug use and of possession for personal use, instead reorienting the criminal sanctions toward targeting sale and supply. There are disproportionately high levels of HIV prevalence amongst prison inmates. These are accompanied by predictably high rates of TB and hepatitis C. Yet only 4 countries provide needle syringe exchange programs, and some 7 provide substitution therapy. And there's very uneven treatment available, including post-release. These matters have to be rectified. 3 countries criminalise sex work, and virtually all others penalise it in some way, as we heard from the very powerful presentation earlier this afternoon. Police and other administrative harassment and violence remains a problem. So does using condom possession as evidence of intent to engage in sex work. This stigmatisation impedes successful HIV responses in many ways and has to be reversed. 2 countries in the region criminalise same-sex relations. A number continue to classify homosexuality as an illness. Social stigma continues to attach to MSM and transgendered people. In most countries, there's no effective anti-discrimination legislation for the benefit of these groups, and where it exists, it is often difficult to enforce. Thus, an important risk group is difficult to reach with prevention and treatment services. Alarmingly high. There's a diverse set of reasons for this, but they seem to include legacy intellectual property regimes that aren't fit for purpose, and therapeutics purchasing policy that leaves a lot to be desired in some cases. In addition, official attitudes to HIV positive people from health professionals and other officials is in many cases below evidence has been too often ignored, and so we have the problem that we face today. So the question is what to do now? The answer is to apply the evidence, and the evidence is overwhelmingly in favour of treating HIV as a health problem, not a justice problem, to respect the dignity of people affected by HIV and the groups at risk of it, and to ensure the effective delivery of healthcare to those who need it. Reactionary attitudes and regressive laws have to be challenged and then changed. People in the region need to be given direct access to accurate information about HIV issues, perhaps via social media, and initiatives that are evidence-based need to be reinforced. This is the only way that we're going to be able to turn the numbers around in this part of the world and reverse this regional epidemic that simply did not need to happen. This Commission has no coercive power. We can't order anyone to do anything or to stop doing anything, but we can and we will engage in dialogue, as we've been urged to, and we can come up with recommendations that are backed up by strong evidence. I want to conclude my summing up by thanking everyone who has participated in this dialogue yesterday and today for your invaluable assistance in helping to equip the Commission to do its task. I hope that you will continue to support our work, and that when you see our report, you will feel that we deserve your support. Thank you.